The hum of the simulators was the only music she allowed herself. It was a constant, a low thrumming that resonated in the concrete floor of the hangar and up through the soles of her worn boots. For Alara Vance, it was the sound of ghosts. Ghosts of flight, ghosts of battles fought in digital worlds that bled with the memory of real ones. Here at Airbase K-7, perched on the razor edge of the world, she was just the tech. The quiet woman with streaks of gray in her tightly bound hair and a perpetual smudge of hydraulic fluid on her cheek. She was 51 years old, and to the pilots, young men with sharp jaws and sharper egos, she was invisible furniture, a necessary but uninteresting part of the machinery that enabled their glory. They called her Ellie, a soft, dismissive name that felt alien on their tongues. They would saunter in, smelling of confidence and commissary coffee, and point at a flickering screen or a lagging joystick. Ellie, Sim 3's got a glitch. The rudder pedals feel soft, Alara would nod, her gaze already distant, looking past the pilot and into the soul of the machine. She would not speak, but would simply retrieve her tools, her movements economical and certain. Her hands, though etched with fine lines and scarred at the knuckles, moved with the grace of surgeon. She knew the simulators not as code and wiring, but as living things. She knew their tempers, their aches, the phantom pains they carried from 1,000 simulated deaths. Colonel Thorne, the base commander, tolerated her presence as a necessary evil mandated by some faceless logistics command thousands of miles away. He was a man carved from granite and procedure, and Alara, with her quiet self-containment, was an anomaly he couldn't categorize. He saw her as a civilian contractor, a glorified mechanic whose contract cost his budget more than it should. Keep the Sims at 95% operational readiness, Vance, he had told her on her first day, his eyes sweeping over her as if she were a faulty piece of equipment. She had simply nodded, the silence in her response more definitive than any promise. The young pilots, men like Lieutenant Jake Ace Martinez and his wingman, Lieutenant Rico Hotshot Davis, saw even less. They were the tip of the spear, gods of the sky in their sleek F/A-38 Vipers. To them, Alara was a ground dweller, earthbound and irrelevant. They would joke as she worked, their voices loud in the cavernous space. Bet she hasn't been higher than a stepladder in 20 years, Hotshot once muttered to Ace, loud enough for her to hear. Alara didn't flinch. She simply tightened a loose actuator, her focus absolute. She heard them, but she didn't listen. Their words were just noise, static against the pure, clean hum of the machines. But there were others who saw things differently. Airman First Class Sam Brody, a lanky kid on his first deployment, worked in ground maintenance. He noticed things the pilots didn't. He saw the way Alara's hands hovered over a console before she touched it, as if sensing its energy. He saw her late at night, long after the pilots were gone, sitting not at the tech station but in the pilot's seat of a powered-down simulator. Her eyes would be closed, her hands resting on the throttle and stick, her body locked in a stillness that was not restful, but coiled. He once asked her about a recurring hydraulic leak in Viper 7's landing gear, a problem that had stumped the entire maintenance crew. Alara looked at the schematics he held out. She didn't consult a manual. She pointed to a single, tiny pressure valve. "It's not the seal," she said, her voice a low rasp, and used to conversation. "It's the housing. There's a hairline fracture from a hard landing. It only weeps above 4,000 psi during retraction. You won't see it on a ground check." She turned and walked away, leaving Sam staring at the diagram, a sudden, chilling respect dawning in his eyes. He checked. She was right. Her nights were her own. When the base fell into the deep, cold silence of the high-altitude dark, Alara would bring the simulators to life. She didn't run the standard training programs. She wrote her own. She programmed scenarios so complex, so brutally demanding, that they would have broken the confidence of the most seasoned pilot. She flew against impossible odds, in impossible weather, her mind weaving through canyons of code and data, as if they were real. In the dark, with the canopy of the simulator closed around her, she wasn't Ellie the tech. She was someone else entirely. Her hands, free from the weight of others' judgment, danced across the controls. The muscle memory was a phantom limb, an echo of a life she had buried long ago. On the inside of her left wrist, hidden by the cuff of her coveralls, was a faded tattoo, a stylized bird of prey, wings folded for a dive. It was a ghost, too. The tension on the border had been a low simmer for months, but now it was beginning to boil. Enemy patrols grew bolder, testing their response times, mapping their defenses. A new threat emerged from the gray skies to the north. Intelligence called it the Cobra, a new generation of enemy fighter with flight characteristics that defied their understanding. It was fast, agile, and it possessed a terrifying ability to perform post-stall maneuvers that left the Vipers helpless. The pilots, so accustomed to their technological superiority, were shaken. Their confidence began to fray. The simulators became the front line of this new war. They had to learn to fight the Cobra, to understand it, before they met it in a sky that offered no second chances. But the standard simulation software, designed by contractors in sterile office parks, couldn't replicate the enemy's physics-defying agility. The program would crash, or the enemy AI would fly erratically, breaking the immersion and frustrating the pilots. "This is garbage," Ace Martinez snapped after his fifth simulated death in an hour. "It doesn't move like that. It's a ghost. We can't train against a ghost." Colonel Thorne's fury was a cold, hard thing. He assembled the lead instructor, a young captain named Egan, and the senior pilots in the briefing room adjacent to the simulator bay. Alara was there, ostensibly to answer technical questions about the simulator's performance. She stood in the back, silent, a ghost in her own right. "Captain Egan," Thorne began, his voice dangerously low, "your pilots are losing faith in the very tools meant to save their lives. The simulations are failing." "What?" Egan, flustered, gestured vaguely at a data plot on the main screen. "Sir, the problem is the flight model. The intelligence reports on the Cobra's low speed, high-alpha maneuvers, they're outside the known performance envelope. The physics engine can't handle it. It's like trying to teach a car to fly. The numbers don't work." He pointed to a specific data point. "This maneuver here, a high-G rudder reversal at near-zero airspeed, it's impossible. It breaks the simulation because it's physically impossible." Alara watched, her expression unchanging. But inside, she felt a flicker of something ancient. She wasn't seeing code or data points. She was seeing the sky. She understood the maneuver not as a mathematical problem, but as a conversation between a pilot, a machine, and the air itself. She felt the strain on the airframe, the precise ballet of thrust vectoring nozzles and canards, the controlled fall that looked like chaos but was, in fact, the highest form of discipline. That night, after the last frustrated pilot had departed, Alara locked the door to the simulator bay. The hum of the machines was her company. She didn't just tweak the existing code. She plunged into the core of the physics engine, a sanctum of programming that no field technician was ever supposed to touch. Her fingers moved over the keyboard with a speed and certainty that defied her role as a simple mechanic. She wasn't debugging a program. She was translating a memory. She poured her own ghost into the machine, her own deep, intuitive knowledge of what it felt like to push an airframe past its limits, to dance on the edge of a stall and turn it into a weapon. She rewrote the laws of the simulated world, not based on abstract mathematics, but on the remembered feeling of G-forces and the whisper of air over a dying wing. The next morning, Captain Egan was the first to try the updated simulation. He strapped in, full of skepticism. The program loaded. The enemy Cobra appeared on his screen. He engaged. The AI Cobra didn't just fight, it hunted. It performed the impossible maneuver Egan had described, a fluid, terrifying pirouette in the sky that brought it instantly onto his tail. Before Egan could even react, a simulated missile strike turned his screen to static. He tried again, and again. Each time, the result was the same. He was utterly, comprehensively outmatched. He emerged from the simulator, his face pale, his uniform damp with sweat. He stormed over to Colonel Thorne, who was observing from the command console. Alara stood quietly in the background, wiping down a monitor with a soft cloth. "Sir, this is a joke," Egan said, his voice tight with anger. "The tech has turned it into an arcade game. No aircraft can move like that. No pilot can fly like that. It's not a simulation anymore. It's a fantasy. She's made it impossible." Thorne's eyes narrowed, first at Egan's outburst, then at Alara. He saw her placid expression and mistook it for ignorance. "Vance," he said, his voice sharp, "did you exceed your authorization?" "I updated the physics model to reflect the intelligence," she replied simply, her voice flat. "You made it unwinnable," Egan countered. Alara's gaze finally shifted to meet his. For the first time, a flicker of something other than serene detachment showed in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, ancient sadness. "It is not impossible," she said softly. "It is only difficult." The air crackled. The two-ship patrol, Razor 1 and 2, had missed their last 3 check-ins. A deep, resonant klaxon began to sound across the base, a sound that cut through the mundane and left only cold dread. On the main tactical display in the command center, their icons had gone from green to yellow to a final, ominous gray. They were gone. Seconds later, a new threat blossomed on the screen. A squadron of 8 enemy contacts, flying in a predatory formation, crossing the border at high speed. Their vector was unmistakable. They were heading for a high-value asset, a slow-moving RC-135 rivet joint surveillance aircraft, a fat, helpless target lumbering through its orbit. Colonel Thorne's voice was like stone. "Scramble Ace and Hotshot. I want Vipers in the air now." The pilots sprinted for their jets, the controlled urgency of their training taking over. In the command center, the mood was grim. Everyone, from Thorne to the lowest-ranking comms tech, was glued to the tactical display. They watched as the 2 blue icons representing Ace and Hotshot climbed to intercept the swarm of red. The comms channel, at first filled with professional, clipped jargon, soon devolved into something more primal. "They're on me. I can't shake him." It was Hotshot's voice, tight with strain. "He's turning inside my radius." Ace yelled. These things, they moved just like the sim. The words hung in the air of the command center, a sudden, chilling vindication for the quiet woman standing in the corner. Captain Egan's face went white. Thorne's knuckles were white on the edge of the console. They were watching Egan's impossible fantasy play out in real life, and it was slaughtering their best pilots. A missile warning blared over the speakers, followed by a choked cry from Hotshot. His icon vanished from the screen. "Rico!" Ace screamed. "Viper 2 is down. I have 4 on my tail." As panic began to set in, a new crisis erupted on the ground. A klaxon of a different sort, a shrill digital alarm, echoed through the command center. The screens flickered. Red warning icons bloomed across the network status display. "Sir, we have a cyber attack," a tech shouted. "The network is compromised. They're in our flight line systems. All ground links are down. We can't launch the reserve fighters." The base was now defenseless against a follow-up attack. Ace was alone, minutes from being shot down, and the rest of their air power was locked on the ground by a ghost in the machine. The cyber team worked frantically, their commands met with locked-out terminals and cascading error messages. The enemy was inside their walls. Through the rising chaos, a single figure moved with purpose. Alara Vance walked from the back of the room, her expression calm, her eyes focused. She ignored the dramatic tactical display, showing Ace's desperate, weaving flight. She went to a secondary engineering terminal that no one ever used. The cyber chief, a frantic young lieutenant, tried to wave her away. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." Alara didn't answer. Her fingers descended on the keyboard. They didn't just type. They flew, a blur of motion that was both aggressive and graceful. She wasn't a cyber expert, but she knew the Viper's soul, from its beating heart of an engine to the fragile nerves of its data links. She recognized the architecture the virus was exploiting, a backdoor in the groundlink protocols that was a relic of an older system. She didn't try to fight the virus on the network. She bypassed it. With a series of crisp, archaic commands that hadn't been in a technical manual for decades, She severed the flight line systems from the main network, isolated them in their own digital bubble, and initiated a hard reboot from the command line. Green lights began to flicker back on across the status board. Flight systems are coming back online, someone shouted in disbelief. She did it, but it was too late. Ace was trailing smoke, his energy bleeding away. The enemy was closing for the kill. There was only one Viper left on the emergency standby pad, fully armed and fueled. But every available pilot was either still scrambling to get suited up or too far from the flight line to make the 90-second launch window. They had a sword, but no one to wield it. Alara turned from the terminal and looked directly at Colonel Thorne. The ambient noise of the room seemed to fade away. Her eyes, clear and steady, held a fire he had never seen. "I can fly it," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the din like a blade. Thorne stared at her, incredulous. "You're a civilian tech." It was Airman Sam Brody, who had run in from the flight line to report the system's recovery, who spoke up. His voice was trembling but clear. "Sir," he blurted out, "with all due respect, you should let her. She knows that jet better than the people who built it. I need a pilot, damn it, not a mechanic." Thorne roared, his desperation boiling over. Alara didn't raise her voice. She simply held his gaze and spoke two words, a name he didn't know but felt the weight of instantly. "Call sign Wraith." She slowly, deliberately, pushed up the sleeve of her grease-stained coveralls. There on her wrist, faded by time and sun, was the tattoo of the diving hawk. A profound silence fell over the command center. In the corner, an old master sergeant in the communications section, a man who had been processing classified signals since before Ace was born, audibly gasped. His eyes were wide with a forgotten reverence. He remembered the name. Wraith. A ghost from Black Ops mission logs from the Zarian conflict, a pilot credited with an impossible number of kills, a legend who had simply vanished from the records. "My God," the sergeant whispered to himself. "It's her." Thorne looked from the tattoo back to her eyes. He saw no ego, no plea for glory. He saw only an absolute, unshakable certainty. He was out of time and out of options. The tactical display showed Ace's Viper in a death spiral. He looked at the quiet, middle-aged woman before him and made the decision that would define his career. "Go," he breathed. Alara didn't run. She moved with a sprinter's focused intensity, her body a study in purpose. She was halfway to the hangar door before Thorne had finished the word. On the flight line, the ground crew, seeing a civilian tech in coveralls making for the last ready Viper, moved to intercept her. She flowed past them, not with aggression, but with an irresistible momentum. "Ma'am, you're not authorized," the crew chief shouted, reaching for her arm. She didn't even look at him. "Get out of my way," she commanded, and the authority in her voice, a tone of pure, undiluted command, froze him in his tracks. She didn't need the crew for her pre-flight. Her hands swept over the cockpit, a blur of practiced, intimate gestures, strapping in, flipping switches, initiating the startup sequence. It was a ritual performed from a place deeper than memory. It was instinct. The canopy hissed shut. The Viper's engine spooled up with a hungry roar. Without a word to the tower, she taxied onto the runway. Her takeoff wasn't the graceful, sweeping climb of an air show. It was a brutal, vertical assertion of power. She pulled the jet into a maximum G climb, pushing the airframe to the very edge of its structural limits, converting fuel into altitude with terrifying efficiency. In the command center, they watched her telemetry data spike into regions they considered purely theoretical. "Who is that?" someone whispered in awe. Her voice, when it came over the comms, was a pool of absolute calm in the storm of panic chatter. It was a voice they had never heard before, stripped of its quiet rasp, now clear and resonant with purpose. "Viper Actual, this is Echo 1. I have the lead." She chose a new call sign. Wraith was a ghost of the past. Today required something new. "Who the hell is Echo 1? Ace Martinez gasped, his own jet shuddering as he desperately evaded a stream of cannon fire. "Your wingman, Lieutenant," Alara's voice replied, serene and steady in his ear. "Stop trying to outturn him. You're bleeding energy. Break right and extend. Now." Ace, his own training and instinct screaming at him to keep turning, obeyed the voice. He didn't know why. It was the calm, the certainty, the sheer command in her tone. He slammed his stick to the right. A heartbeat later, a heat-seeking missile screamed through the airspace where his cockpit had just been. What unfolded next was not a dogfight. It was a masterclass. It was a surgeon at work. Alara, in her lone Viper, did not engage the 4 enemy cobras in a swirling melee. She refused to play their game. She used the vertical, climbing and diving, trading altitude for speed and speed for position, a perfect execution of energy maneuvering that the younger pilots had only read about in textbooks. She was a phantom, her movements precise, economical, and utterly lethal. She made the sky her own. "Bandit at your 6 o'clock low," she said to her own display, her voice a soft murmur. She wasn't speaking to anyone. She was communing with the jet. She pulled the Viper into a gut-wrenching climb, forcing the lead enemy pilot to follow. As he neared the apex, his energy bleeding away, she did the impossible. She executed the exact maneuver Captain Egan had declared a fantasy. Her Viper seemed to hang in the air for a moment, then pirouette on its own axis, its nose coming around with impossible speed. The pursuing cobra, caught off guard, flew straight into her sights. A single, perfect burst from her cannon, and the cobra blossomed into a ball of fire. In the command center, a collective gasp went through the room. Egan stared, mesmerized and horrified, at the telemetry data confirming the maneuver. "Impossible," he whispered, but this time it was a prayer. Alara dropped down on the second enemy, luring him into a low-speed turning fight he thought he could win. Just as he pulled for a killing shot, she chopped her throttle and deployed her air brakes, forcing him to overshoot. As he flashed past her canopy, she fired a single missile that didn't miss. 2 down. She cleared Ace's tail with another breathtaking display of defensive flying, then ordered him back to base. "Your bird is damaged, Lieutenant. Get home." Ace, his arrogance stripped away and replaced by a profound, humbling awe, could only whisper, "Yes, ma'am." Now it was 2 against 1. The remaining cobras, their confidence shattered, tried to bracket her. She dove for the deck, pulling them down into the canyons, using the terrain as her ally. She flew with a primal understanding of the landscape, her jet a whisper away from the rock walls. She separated them, then hunted them. One by one, the red icons on the tactical display vanished, each extinguished by a perfect, calculated act of violence. The final kill was a long, patient stalk. She didn't waste a missile. She shadowed him, forcing him into a series of defensive maneuvers that bled his fuel and his nerve, until he made a fatal mistake. A final, clinical burst from her cannon, and the sky was silent. A long moment passed. The only sound in the command center was the quiet hum of the electronics. Then, her voice returned to the comms, as placid as if she were reporting on a routine weather check. "Sky is clear." Echo 1 returning to base. Her landing was as flawless as her combat. She touched the Viper down so gently it seemed to kiss the tarmac. As she taxied toward the hangars, she saw them. It seemed the entire base was there, standing in silent rows on the concrete. The ground crew, the cybertechs, the other pilots, the command staff. They stood in the harsh glare of the floodlights, their faces turned toward her, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a reverence usually reserved for gods. The whine of the turbines spinning down was the only sound. Alara popped the canopy, the cool night air washing over her. She didn't look triumphant. She looked weary, the fire in her eyes banked to a low, steady coal. The silence was absolute. Colonel Thorne walked forward, his boots crunching softly on the tarmac. He stopped at the base of the boarding ladder. Ace Martinez, his face streaked with grime and tears, stood beside him. They looked up at the woman in the grease-stained coveralls, this quiet technician who was more of a pilot than they could ever hope to be. Thorne, a man of regulations and rigid certainty, found himself without words. He simply brought his hand up in a slow, formal salute. It was the highest sign of respect he could offer. Alara looked down at him. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was enough. She unstrapped and climbed down the ladder, her movements steady and sure, ignoring the hundreds of eyes on her. She walked past Thorn, past Ace. She didn't look at any of them. Airman Sam Brody stood near the edge of the crowd, holding a clean white rag. As she passed, he timidly held it out to her. She took it without breaking stride, wiped the lingering grease and sweat from her hands, and handed it back to him with a quiet, "Thank you." Then she just kept walking. She walked away from a Viper, from the silent, awestruck crowd, from the wreckage of their assumptions. She walked back toward the dark, silent hangar that housed the simulators, a solitary figure receding into the night. Her shadow stretched long behind her, cast by the lights of the runway she had just saved. The hum of the machines was waiting for her, the only music she ever needed. The ghost was returning to her shell.